Hi everyone, I'm Trent Kusters of League of Geeks, and this is the Game Maker's Notebook. Today I've just had a fantastic conversation with Johnny Galvatron of Beethoven Dinosaur. He's the creative director of The Artful Escape, critically acclaimed, BAFTA award-winning, and we spoke about working with Annapurna from very early on and how supportive they were throughout all of dev, including especially the process behind such a star-studded VO cast and the stellar performances that came out of it. We also spoke about how Beethoven and Dinosaur's team of misfits and outsiders push the conventions of our medium with their myriad of influences, atypical of what we would usually see in video games. And then, of course, Johnny's former life as an Australian rock star and that journey to being the creative director of his own BAFTA award-winning studio. Johnny hails from my own hometown of Melbourne, so there's a bit of a Melbourne rat bag rapport there. It was a super fun conversation, and he's a very, very creatively insightful man. It feels like he's lived 10 lives over. His kid Doc is even hollering in the background. It was a wonderful chat. I look forward to showing it to you. Enjoy. Hey, Johnny, welcome.
Hey, Trent, you chocolate eclair. It's great to be here.
Yeah, good. Thanks for joining us, mate. So everyone, here we have Johnny Galvatron, creative director of The Artful Escape. So great to be chatting with you, man. We bumped into each other just recently at your much belated launch party. It's fun times, man.
Yeah, look, we had some cash in the budget set aside for the launch, even though the game came out almost a year ago. We had to spend that cash. And we had it in a big ballroom. And we won a BAFTA in the meantime, so we pretended that it was about winning a BAFTA.
I love that. Is it like actually the launch party, or is it just the BAFTA comes along and then you're like, oh, we actually should celebrate this?
Yeah, and now I need to introduce myself as I walk on stage. BAFTA award-winning game developer Johnny Galvatron.
Well, hey, Johnny, it's been quite a wild ride. Like watching you from. I mean, I still remember the day in the studio when Darcy, our community manager at the time, was like, "Whoa, check out this game!" And it was on Kickstarter, and we were like, "Oh, whoa, crazy! It's from Melbourne. That's wild." Same, we're from Melbourne as well. And then meeting you at PAX Oz, and all that stuff, and just watching, the years that followed and everything that came together to see this game launch, and then obviously the BAFTA and the party, and now we're here today. The Game Maker's Notebook, we often start with, how did you get into games? How did this all happen for you? And I heard you say in an interview once that you've been making this game for 37 years. So why don't we start as far back as possible? and like, where did games and music sort of intersect for Johnny? How did this journey begin?
It begins in the cafeteria of Belmont High School, where I played my first gig way back in the day, and my dad came and filmed it on a handycam. I remember him full suit, standing out amongst the year 10s. Thanks, Dad. I guess I have like a big, I had one of those big rock and roll stories. I guess initially I started, I did 3D computer animation at like SAE,
right?
Where you just, you don't really have to get accepted. You just kind of pay and they let you
yeah,
in.
you just pay. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I did that, and then I think 3 or 4 days after I graduated, I got a record deal with Warner Brothers. Not
an animation record deal, right? Like
no, I completely forgot everything about what I had learned at uni. I've never utilized it in any way. And yeah, we signed one of the last big kind of traditional record deals. It's my child yelling in the background.
You get Doc just hollering in the background.
It's hollering. He's so sick of this story. So I got one of the last big record deals, kind of 6-figure record deals. Hopes were high for the Galvatrons, and we were kind of like 1.5 hit wonders. But like toured the world, played stadiums, toured with Def Leppard, and
I
Cheap
remember it.
Trick, and
I remember it. I mean, we're pretty much we're of a similar vintage, Johnny. And I remember Channel V and Johnny Galvatron and the Galvatrons. Like you were a hot minute there in Australian rock.
We ran for a good time, not a long time, and yeah, I got to like live the dream. It was. I'm glad I got to do it and see how much I didn't enjoy it. You know, there's times obviously that you think back to and think, wow, that's very surreal. Like, you know, being side stage and watching Devo and just like, you know, being in a bunch of like rock stars who are passing around a joint, you know what I mean? And being like, man, I love these bands. He's passing it to me. And being on stage and seeing all that and doing photo shoots and doing all that stuff. And generally, I hated the whole thing. It's very difficult being, especially it was at that, you know, kind of fall of Rome era of the music industry, of the traditional music industry. Yeah. And the shine had definitely come off the industry. Everyone was getting fired. I think our A&R reps got fired before our record even came out.
Were you the cause of that? I love it. They're like, you signed who?
Right, maybe.
The Galva what?
No, I think it was a while coming, that one.
I think it may be worth just pausing for a second, because this is a game dev podcast, and I think we should probably just point out clearly that, yes, we are talking about a rock band, like a mainstream alternative band that Johnny was the frontman of in Australian rock. Yes, we pivoted hard from the animation degree straight into a record deal, but Johnny was actually in the music industry. As you can probably tell, if you've played The Artful Escape by Beethoven Dinosaur or seen it, it's I would say semi-autobiographical, or at least spoken from a lot of experience. Yeah. So that's what we are talking about.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I'm leading up. I'm doing the big build up. We've got an hour. You know? Yeah. Hated it. Being a mid-tier band sucks. You all sleep in the same room. You just spend your time in a plane, in a van. And I was disillusioned very quickly. It's horrible. And so the band broke up. I didn't leave the house for about 6 years. I wrote a novel. I showed it to no one. And then I saw a kind of, the same way I did with the Galvatrons, I saw a kind of angle that I could enter the video game industry, and what kind of idea I could have and how I could use that musical knowledge to try and make something a little bit, or approach music in a different way than people had in games before. And that kind of leads me of how I got into the industry, which is just making Kickstarter with absolutely no audience that I had acquired. Which is, you know, if you're starting a Kickstarter, you know, build an audience. Don't just throw it on there and be like, dig my Steve Vai alien guitar shit. And when that was up, I got noticed by a company called I Am 8-Bit, who make merch. Yeah, I know. And they told Annapurna about it. And I had a couple of conversations with Annapurna. And then in the end, it came down to Annapurna saying, we're going to be at PAX in Melbourne in 3 months. Have you got a table there? And we were like, yeah, we've definitely got a table there. Absolutely.
There might even be a TV on
it. I've got a demo ready to go. That was a complete lie. We had no demo. We had no table. I called in my last rock and roll favors of my mid-tier rock and roll career, and got a table. One of the last tables at PAX. We crunched for 3 months. Me, Sean Slevin, Justin Blackwell. We crunched for 3 weeks. 3 months. Made a demo. Annapurna rocked up at 11 on the first morning after we'd been up for 2 days, and then victory.
There it is.
Got the deal. They took me out to lunch, and it only took like 6 years to make the game. Easy.
Which we didn't tell them at the time. They probably knew, but, you know, Annapurna probably took one look at you and they're like, we're not going to see this game for 6 years.
This guy is a loose unit. That's what
So I love it. I love that. I love that story and that journey. What was the point where you actually like picked up Unreal, or you actually said like, "What? Let's zone in on that point where you're like, okay, done with music, blah blah blah. Now game." Like, did you just start toying around? Were you like, "I'm going to dust off my animation skills"? How did that sort of come about?
Yeah. I think you probably relate to this a little, which is like when at the start of the Galvatrons, I was like, hey, I might just write a Van Halen kind of track. And then a couple of years later, you have a band and a record deal, and you're in Frankfurt in the Sex District playing under some blue light in a cupboard. So I was like, oh, I'm just going to make like an iPad app. I'm just going to make like a little kind of fun little iPad app. And I think you had to pay for Unreal at the time. So I bought Unreal and started doing these little, if you've seen the Artful Escape, it's this kind of 2.5D game where we have these 2D illustrations placed in 3D space. And I started working on that. And Unreal Engine is fantastic. It's very friendly for artists, and there's just so much content and YouTube to teach you how to use it. So that's all I did. I didn't go and do any course or anything. And then I made a little video, and I heard that Unreal were giving away grants for development. I thought, well, my game looks a little bit different to the usual Unreal game. And I didn't even apply, actually. I just sent them an email with a little demo or a little video. You couldn't play it. As saying, is this the kind of thing that you're looking for? No in between email. The next email I got was just, we're giving you like 25 grand. And,
you got the job, buddy.
Yeah, totally. And I was just like, well, I'm a video game developer now. And that's how and at that point, man, I had tears so big in my jeans that they wouldn't let me into pubs. I was so broke. So I was like straight down, bought 24 KFC nuggets. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, that's it. The expensive stuff, just straight to it.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And yeah, so that, Unreal, I have a lot of thanks and gratitude to Epic and Unreal Engine and all the people there.
It's amazing,
because they started me off
those seeds, right? Like you can, even with Unmellow, like I can trace it back all my career. My career started like in video games because there was one guy, a journalist at just the local paper that I just straight up lied to and said, I'm a games journalist. Can I write a column on the Halo 2 or Halo 3 launch or whatever I wanted to cover at the local shopping mall? And he's just like, sure, kid.
Yeah.
Knew I was bullshitting, knew I was lying, but he just gave me my break. And it was like this little spark that started everything off. It's amazing how you can sort of trace things back. Even to, Armello started as an iPad app as well. Let's just make a little iPad card game. It'll take us 8 weeks or something like that. And then, 6 years later.
It's crazy, isn't it? I ended up getting to meet Tim Sweeney at
great.
at GCAP. No, not GCAP. The other one. The one in America. Yeah, that's the one. And he's up there. And someone introduced me to Tim Sweeney. I was like, dude, I just want to say, like, you changed my life, started my career. The money you gave me started my career, and I have this big deal, and I have a company, and I just wanted to say thank you. And he went, cool.
He's cool. Yeah, it is cool.
Yeah.
It's not wrong. It's cool.
Yeah. Yeah, I was like, thanks, Tim. Thanks, Tim. I'm out.
Amazing. Okay, so you've got a company now, right? Like it's happening. You've got the Epic deal. You've got the Annapurna deal. Like let's jump to that. What does that mean? You've got the Annapurna deal. What happens from there forward? Because I'm looking at the credits here, and I obviously know a few of your crew. Like you built a bit of a team around you. Like fill us in on the next steps.
Yeah, it's that suddenly you have great power and great responsibility. Suddenly you have a budget. Suddenly you're like someone who owns a company, and you're someone who's responsible for people's livelihoods. And at the same time, you have to like try and maintain being like a breezy artist.
Yeah.
So I think I definitely I think one of the things we did best was build the team. The team we have is incredible, and our art team, I think, is like, BAFTA quality.
Yeah, that's it. You don't need to say
the
anything. The BAFTAs have already said it for you. We can just cut to that presentation for this part.
I haven't got my BAFTA yet.
Really, they haven't sent it to you? You think they'd express post?
They haven't sent. It's apparently it's on the way, but I want to be able to hold it up and talk
cool
through the
little
BAFTA.
mask. There's a really great video of when Lucas Pope won his BAFTAs, his brother Caleb, like sliding down a handrail out the front, like with his long hair, like with his tongue out, holding 2 BAFTAs, like in a suit. It's I think it's the most metal, like 5-second video in video games ever to be made. I love the little masks as well. They're cool. I mean, I'm into it. BAFTAs are cool. So
well done, BAFTA. I had to sign a thing about the BAFTA. Sorry, I'll come back to the question.
No, let's go.
The BAFTAs, you have to sign this thing with the BAFTA that has all these rules on it. That's like, you won't make a cast of it. You're not allowed to sell it. You're not allowed to. You're not allowed to give it to anyone. The only way you can transfer it to someone else is through your will, through your next of kin.
Whoa. That's full
on. It's like an Academy Award. Like, or you can sell it, or you can sell it back to the Academy. Anyway, back to building the team. I just thought that was interesting.
It's super interesting.
And the building the team was one of the things we did well. We pulled people mainly from outside of games. Like I found Arden Beckwith, who's our illustrator, on illustratorsaustralia.com. She didn't even have like an art station or anything. She's hovering out in the wilderness. Well. She's brilliant, yeah. And is very quickly becoming an incredible 3D sculptor as well. So she's just a mega talent.
That's too much power.
We pulled Mikey. Yeah, I know. We pulled our 3D artist Mikey out of Luma in Australia. He was working on Marvel films. He did the car that explodes in Black Panther.
Yeah. For those who are listening, Luma is a big VFX house in Melbourne that there's a PDV, like a tax offset in Australia, similar to the games one for in Canada, but for a film as well in Melbourne here. And so we have some big VFX studios. So Game of Thrones, Marvel, there's a bunch of films that you would be watching, when you stream them from, Disney Plus or Netflix, or, see them at the movies, and, a ton of the VFX actually done here in Melbourne. So Loom is one of the big VFX houses here alongside some others.
Yeah, it sounds like a crazy operation in there as well. Like, like they can't have anything. You can't have your computer attached to the internet, like stuff like that, because people are always trying to steal, like Marvel stuff.
Yeah, it just sounds, sweet Marvel secrets.
Yeah, totally. So it sounds like such a weird job. But we got Mike Hedder there, and Harry, who's one of our level artists who does a bunch of things, like fresh out of the draft, straight out of uni. Nice. And that kid's a miracle, absolute wonder kid. And then we got Tess, who had been doing mobile games, doing animation, building up the team kind of one at a time as we went into development, having no idea what we were doing. The team was the big win for the company when the knowledge I didn't have was filled out by those people, and as we kind of ventured off on this strange road to making our first ever video game with a huge budget and a big team. And it was crazy.
Let me jump in there and ask then, because as I'm playing the Artful Escape, and folks, I really implore you to check out this game if you haven't yet, and especially for those of us who are, maybe running our own studios or have families or whatever. It's also not a long game. It's about 4.5, 5 hours or something like that, Johnny. Something like that, yeah. So definitely check it out. It's just so incredibly impressive. I was constantly impressed by just the scale of the achievement, and I can see why you won a BAFTA for like artistic achievement, because artistic achievement is a really, really great way to like hone in on the very special part of the Artful Escape. And so as I'm playing it, to go back to what we were just talking about, as I'm playing it, because I know about your team, I know how they came from different areas, and I know that this is your first video game as well. And so I'm like, it's absolutely wildly impressive how some of these scenes came together, and the craftsmanship and just the level of polish and finish on these things. And so when you're building out this team, they're all from different walks of life. What do you think is that through line that you're looking for in people that is brought a bunch of folks together who may come from disparate backgrounds, but happen to have some kind of common attitude or common belief or like ability to pull something together so well? How did you grab this, that you're a wild bunch, and bring them together to execute on something so well?
God, that's a great question.
Really, I don't know is a really fair enough answer as well, right?
I think we were always pretty clear on what the Artful Escape was, what we were trying to say, what the subplots of it was, what the subtext of it was. And I think, here's my like quoting someone else's quote. But like Tarantino was like at one point mentored by Terry Gilliam. And Tarantino's speaking to Terry Gilliam, and he's like, your films have this great vision, and everything seems to blend in and push towards that vision. How do you get that from the page to the screen? And he says it's not your job to make the grand vision. It's your job to explain that grand vision to the people you work with and make them understand like what the story is and where it's going, and then you give it to them. Then it becomes their version of that vision. And I think the Artful Escape was always very clear about what it wanted to be thematically and musically, and narratively as well. And so once, I think one of the hard things, being someone who's like worked on this by themselves and then giving it to a team, is like that you feel like you need to do everything, and you feel like you need to be touching everything and be in control of everything. I'm the person who's making this game. I'm the creative director. And don't do that. Don't do that. Just be like, explain what you want to these wonderful artists, and try and get your vision across to them, and then give it to them and let them add their own flavor to it. And then that's what makes it great. So I think it's just a core of everyone understanding where you want to go with the story, and them being able to add in their own artistry and craft, because I'm never going to know Arden's craft as well as Arden does.
Yeah, of course.
So I think at some point you step away and let those artists do what they want, and then if you're all working towards the same vision, you can get something quite spectacular.
So you're standing in the shadows of Johnson Vendetti, huh?
It ain't so bad. It's just that I guess folks think they know who I am, where I should be going.
Have you considered becoming someone else entirely?
Someone else entirely. I've decided to create the most elaborate stage persona the world has ever seen.
Okay. Will you be down for dinner? We're having enchiladas.
The boy you loved may already be gone.
We're going on a ride across the dilated pupils of the cosmos.
The future is yours if you have the courage to grasp it.
Clearly, right? Yeah. But I know what you mean. It's just, and it working, in creative leadership myself, or at League of Geeks and other roles, it really is about defining those outcomes, defining the goals, and then allowing your team to giving them the empowerment to define how they get there. So now
I think too with like a rock and roll with a rock and roll story is just like having a wealth of stuff to draw on. From like making a rock opera, there's a bunch of rock operas you can watch. There's like so many amazing album covers that you can draw inspiration from, and there's a whole world there, and to artistically draw from music and cinema and artistry, and it was very much built up from the opposite of my experience in rock and roll, of that kind of world of dreams and these doors that are going to unlock through your guitar talent. You know what I mean? It's like this really, the Artful Escape is this very teenage version of what you expect the rock and roll dream to be. And so with that kind of clearly defined, that's like the driving force behind the Artful Escape, this concept of a teenage rock and roll dream, and the science fiction aspects of Ziggy Stardust and Bootsy Collins and stuff like that. So I think also my experience is my history with rock and roll is something that actually drove the art style of trying to actively rage against I didn't want to show like the Holiday Inn, like we were talking about before. I wanted to do like with the Artful Escape have my rock and roll dream of what I thought it was going to be, instead of like just 8 people snoring in a bus with like gear on you because you couldn't afford the bigger bus. You know what I mean? Stuff like that.
Yeah, just binging series on their laptops on the bus, sort of thing.
We can afford laptops.
Oh, sorry. How privileged of me. I'm completely misspoke. That's a couple tiers above the goal. Look, when you say rock and roll story and the teenage, boy fantasy or teenage fantasy of like what rock and roll is, it really speaks to me, because when I was playing the game and experiencing it, it was absolutely, it felt like something coming from outside of games. So, a lot of games, they reference games themselves. A lot of the inspiration comes from other games or, games that other people have played.
Yeah.
But it very much felt much like your team, that your influences are coming from out of games. And I got this, fantasy has always been an element of rock, especially for so long with Ziggy Stardust or Kiss. I've even got, I got some touches of Kiss and things in there,
totally.
And so I'm really interested to hear more specifically what some of those influences are, like the main influences that aren't in games, because it really lent it quite a fresh perspective. It felt like something wholly of your team's conception, but I think that's more so just because like you're not drawing from the same standard references that the bulk of the video game industry is.
Yeah. I think that's going to happen more and more. I think like the video game industry is poised on this time that I remember from rock and roll, which is I'll tell you, this is my theory of fathomability.
We're here for
this is one of my theories. The theory of fathomability states that like a medium's cultural importance will degrade when people can understand how it's constructed. So with rock and roll, around the time I was joining, rock and roll from the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s had been kind of confined to the dim cocoons of these elite recording studios, and people were literally engineers who recorded it, and there was a lot of mystery and excitement about this kind of recording, like Air Studios in Montserrat and all these places that you would go to record albums, and it had this mystery to it. And then there's this point where Pro Tools comes into the bedroom, and of course there's this transitional period where you have these great bedroom albums, but then everyone kind of knows now someone who makes music in their bedroom that sounds to their ears very similar to what's on the pop charts. And a lot of people kind of look, I think, at modern music with the same sense of that some people look at modern art, which is like, oh, I could do that. They're wrong. But like, I think that because that kind of bedroom has influenced the sound of popular music itself, becoming quite minimal and electronic, that and of course, you know, a music falling away, becoming extremely fractured once it goes into the streaming services. There isn't like a mainstream and an alternative mainstream. It's just fractured into thousands of subgenres, and you can find exactly what you want. There's that loss of the mainstream and the alternative mainstream. So I think video games is interestingly poised at this point, where it's going from something that's unfathomable to something that's fathomable to people, something that's going from the studio now into the bedroom. Things like MetaHuman, Unreal Engine, blueprints in themselves, part of Unreal Engine, which allows people like me to code. It's interesting. It stands upon a precipice, I think, of is it going to become fathomable to people? Maybe. I don't think it can ever really become fathomable to the point of the way music is. I think there's still that kind of mystery to it. And still, you know, you and me, I'm sure we both play games and think, how the hell did they do that?
Yeah, I had that moment playing your game. I've been in the industry for 15 years. I'm sitting there going, how the fuck did they do this? Yeah.
So to be honest with you, Trent, I've completely forgotten the question, but that's my rant. That's my rant on the theory of fathomableness.
I totally relate, and I think it's, you know, that Indian Renaissance that happened, you know, in the late 2000s, you know, perfectly coinciding with the GFC and giving a lot of us an out there, you know, like when studios started to crumble, all of a sudden people could turn their attention to Unreal or Unity, which had gone free, and throw a game on people's phones, and there was a billion of them in people's pockets. That democratization of an art form, you know, just allowed so many different voices into it. Like yours as well, you know, Unreal was a lot more to license at one point than what you paid for it, even when you had to pay at that point. So
exactly. $35 a month it was, and then it was free.
That was like the last bastion of them trying to make people pay for it before it went completely free. But yeah, it is really wondrous, like seeing your expression come through and your team's expression come through, and from your lived experience, you know, with the Galvatrons and that music career and how it comes through in the game. So what are the artists? Tell me your big inspirations. Like, this album cover,
Ziggy,
you know?
Obviously.
Yeah, Ziggy's a big one. No.
Yeah, there's Ziggy, obviously. Ziggy's a big one. You know, Roger Dean, the artist who does a lot of the Yes album covers. Roger Dean's a really good one to put into Midjourney, AIR. Just if anyone uses Midjourney, AIR, chuck Roger Dean in there as a modifier. Really good one. Ziggy, you know, Bootsy Collins, George Clinton, obviously coming down in a spaceship, you know, in the 70s, way before kind of a lot of that fantasy and rock and roll. Grace Jones. Who else? Lady Gaga. There's a Lady Gaga haircut that you can get when you customize your character. And so a lot of that kind of stuff like that. Kiss, obviously. That kind of fantasy. I really do love. I'm glad you kind of phrased it that way. I really do love fantasy in my rock and roll. And like, you know, even the Who have like this sci-fi song called "I'm a Boy," which is like about it's a world full of only women, and you get born as a boy, and you're ostracized and stuff. Like that's lofty 70s. It's weird, like rock and roll opera stuff. Do you know what I mean? I can totally imagine Pete Townsend like writing that concept as well. Being like, oh, it's so hard to be a man.
Yeah, woe is me being a man in the 70s. If only people would understand. there is a really beautiful element to that fantasy and of the concept album. Like there's this 70s epic concept album or the concept band. Like I can still, I remember the first album that I ever bought was Meatloaf Bat Out of Hell. And that album cover just as a kid, because we bought a CD player. It was like exciting for the family when Dad was like, pick out any CD in this JB Hi-Fi, like our best guy. And I'm wandering around. It took me ages, and I bought Bat Out of Hell because I thought it had took the words out of my mouth, but it's actually not on that album. But anyway, but I bought it.
No, it's not on that one.
Yeah, and I'm looking at the cover, and it literally set my brain on fire. I felt the synapses change my brain, like just looking at the album art, and throwing.
One of the classic album covers, hey.
Yeah, it's beautiful. R.I.P. Meatloaf, legend. So.
I know. I will always remember you for your performance at the AFL Grand Final.
Oh, yes. Amazing. Yeah. Australia, the Aussie rules football. So for our listeners, it's an interesting one. AFL Grand Final Meatloaf. Good little YouTube.
Don't look it up. Leave Meatloaf in your mind. How you remember him when he was a monster in the I Would Do Anything for Love film.
Amazing. I love that. Talk about setting my brain on fire as a child, that film clip. Wow. Okay, so now I'm interested in diving into, we've spoken a lot about your creative expression and your team, but you've been working with Annapurna as well for 6 years. And something that I know about Annapurna, or that I've heard from folks who work with them, is the amazing amount of creative support and mentorship and everything that they provide. Yeah. So I'm really keen to hear about your relationship with, Nath and the production crew and everything over there, and how that sort of formed itself and developed and what sort of influence they had on yourself and the team and the game.
Yeah, well, Annapurna is one of the good things they do is give you money. But apart from that is that they have this library of people that you can kind of check out. There's like Nathan Vella and Nathan Gary and Deb Mars, all these people who have worked in, all the games that they work at Sony Santa Monica originally, in some of my most formative games like Journey and stuff like that, God of War. And we were always very open to anything that they had to say about the game. I'm not very... I'm not someone who guards their creative kind of angle righteously. I'm always kind of someone who's very eager to get other opinions on what I'm working on. And Nathan, it's funny, like Nathan is wonderful narratively. Nathan's now the full head of Annapurna, of cinema and their television and their interactive division. And he's an amazing he's wonderful to talk to about movies and narrative and stuff like that. And he would just be like, it ranges. It was really good. It ranges from just like, all right, well, some really nuanced kind of subplot that we could weave into an area, or sometimes it'd just be like, that scene needs to be better, and it, and I'll be like, absolutely. And the funny thing is, sometimes that's the best advice. Sometimes it's just like, that you need to have a better send-off between these two characters, no more than that. And, as someone who's kind of writing it, you think, all right, what are my options here? It makes you just hone in on areas that sometimes need a bit more work. So I guess it's also, too, is like one of the gifts that they have is knowing the advice to give you, whether it needs to be detailed or it needs to just be very blanket, like, this needs more impact, this scene. Yeah. And just when someone says that to you, is something like you just want to get that right. You want to make them proud. That's what I kind of feel like sometimes.
Well, like you were saying before, it's empowering, right? It's they've divined a challenge for you. They've divined an outcome that he's, in your example, Nathan's saying, hey, this scene needs to be better, but he's also entrusting you to do it. He's empowering you as the creatives to then find the solution and express yourselves in, define the goal, but then empowered you to go about doing it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's a very similar thing, isn't it? I didn't blow my mind, Trent. And then then you can speak to Deb and she can help you with logistical stuff and budget stuff. And she's always like, I think one of my favorite lines from Deb is, we're never going to squeeze you. The only squeeze you'll get from us is a hug. So that's like what working with Deb is like, and she's like wonderful. Speaks to you about managing staff and about managing budget and what you can do. And for someone like me and JB who does our accounts, is just invaluable and real world problems that you need to solve outside of the creative sphere.
Yeah,
and then of course we've got like Nathan Vella and Richard, who worked at Naughty Dog, and he's like, there's just like all these people we can go to, and I'm like, I'll just call Richard. I'm like, what do you think about like when people change the aspect ratio for cinematics? Give me your thoughts on that. You know what I mean? So it's like super cool to be able just to bring up these people and kind of tap into that wealth of knowledge. And there wasn't, I've never had a bad day with Annapurna. And the dinners. My God.
Who signs a publishing deal if not for the dinners? It should be in the contract, really. It should be in the contract.
It's up there with like Dave. It's up there with Dave Stells from Unreal Engine. You know what I
mean? Yeah, there's some good dinners flying around in the industry. That's all we're in it for, really. It's like we're working on 2 games at the moment. I don't care about the sales. I just want the dinners on the other side. That's all I'm.
The dinners is so good, and especially coming from the rock and roll industry that has no budget, and it's just like, here's some cabana and some cut up cheese and some crackers, and be thankful.
Yeah, and it's just sitting on the carpet of that hotel room that you're all sharing.
It's in the Warner Brothers office with cask wine.
All right, so it's really beautiful to hear about Annapurna, and it's something that I have heard echoed is the degree of creative support is just astounding that I've heard that they've given, and almost feels like a little bit of a mentorship program, like your creative direction internship with Annapurna is what you're signing, not just your publishing contract or 5 dinners.
I think that's a great way of looking at it, because obviously they have these they work with Heart Machine, who are the Hyperlight Drifter kids, and Ben Esposito, and all these people who are like really amazing game developers. And I'm just like the kid who's like, I feel like the younger kid in Dazed and Confused who's just happy to be like out with like Woodison cruising in the car. That's how I feel. Yeah.
I love it. I guess I'll be the almost famous kid then, interviewing you in your later years.
Dope. That's my favorite ever screenplay is Cameron Crowe's Almost Famous. It's such a good screenplay. Just throw it out.
So I want to hone in on some specific elements of the Artful Escape now, and just sort of get your take, because it is one of these games that you can tell when you're playing it. There's a lot more behind the words that are actually being said, or elements there. So I'm just going to like rapid fire through a few different things, and really keen to get your take, and the team's take is the travel sequences, the travel gate sequences. Tell me, when did you have the idea for the psychedelic? Do you have like main influences? How were they constructed? How early on were they in the game?
The bits where you traveled to and from the Cosmic Lung, those bits? That's called a hip-hop edit. It's made famous by Darren Aronofsky in Requiem for a Dream. So that is the main influence of that. I guess Edgar Wright, he does some hip hop edits as well. Those sharp kind of crazy psychedelic edits. I had to. Initially, the team was like, "It's a bit full on." I'm like, "Good. We need to make it more full on."
Turn it to 11. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love it. And so that construction, was that early on in the game? Were they things that, one of those things that came together pretty quickly, or were they sort of like, because
I made that really quickly.
Yeah. It seems like one of those things that like you could spend, a year crafting and getting right, or it's someone like could come together over a weekend,
Yeah, well, I feel like that kind of scene is just like, there's a desert and a flower and he's in space and it's conceptual, and like I'm sure you could like really break it down about what it means, but like I didn't.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I love it. All right, next question. Sunglasses.
Yeah.
Everyone's wearing sunglasses. Yes. The absolute question is there a metaphorical reason, or is it because you didn't want to animate eyeballs?
It's both. It's definitely both. some people ask me, and I'd say like, because everyone has a stage persona, everyone has something they want to hide. There's always a shield, some kind of fictional or fantasy shield between you and someone else, and very rarely do you let it down. And that's the philosophical answer. And then the real answer is, of course, I didn't want to animate the eyeballs.
It can be both. It can absolutely be both.
Yeah. Totally, it's both.
Yeah, this isn't a hard-hitting investigative podcast. We can just let that one. It can absolutely be both if you want it to be both, Johnny. All right.
Both.
So the next thing is guitar solos. I mean, how many hours of guitar solos are we talking here? And talk to me about the process of, because, a solo is generally a solo, right? But you can, in your game, almost for the entirety of the game, maybe 90% of it, you can just hold that X button and wail the entire time. So I'm really keen to hear about the technicality of that, who's writing the solos, like making sure that the game can withstand having a solo just wail over the top of it, and and then giving that agency to the player. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on all that.
The idea starting off was that you could shred anywhere, and it's funny because I've watched so many reviews of the game where they talk about how they think the music works, and they're all wrong. People think that we have this like 2 tracks running and we just kind of switch it on and off. Which is definitely not how it works at all, because guitars the tricky thing about bringing guitar in and out is actually the bringing it in and the bringing it out. It's not the in between, because guitars are very kind of analog acoustic things, and you can tell when you fading out a guitar or fading in a guitar sounds completely unnatural.
You miss the strum and the muting of the strings.
You miss the
physicality
grunts,
of it.
You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So the way that it works is, have you ever heard of Dark Side of the Rainbow?
Yes, I have. I've watched it
Dark Side
many times, actually.
I'll explain Dark Side of the Rainbow for people. It's kind of like a stoner myth kind of thing that if you play Dark Side of the Moon and start it on the 3rd roar of the MGM lion in The Wizard of Oz, that the music lines up with the film. And you can watch it on YouTube. Someone's made edits of it. And it doesn't really line up. It's actually, pattern recognition in your brain working overtime to find some kind of connection between the audio and the visual. And that's actually how guitar works. It's actually your brain looking for the interaction between 2 audios instead of an audio and a visual. So we make sure we write everything in, a key. Each world in the game is in a different key. And then we'll record like half an hour, 45 minutes of just Eden Altman, who's our guitarist, just wailing. And we'll give him like, all right, in this world, it's like you're really Steve Vai. We want lots of bends, lots of like shimmery kind of stuff. And then we will cut it all up. And then we add like a harmonic squeal at the start to bring you in, because when Francis plays his guitar, he like throws his arms back and like does this grand kind of entrance into the shred. So we add that to the front, chop up a bunch of stuff, put it together, and then what we do in Engine is we add a little harmonic little ding when you stop, so we can hide us turning the guitar down. And then that turns into like weird little happy accidents where, because there's a harmonic ringing out, if you start playing again, you will then be like making a little chord with the harmonic when you start the next riff. So what it is really is like, people tell me it's just like, oh, the guitar hit that crescendo beautifully. I'm like, you hit it beautifully in your mind tank, because it's not really set up to like any crescendo. Yeah. So the guitar is actually just a work of making sure everything is like theoretically musically correct, then a little bit of trial and error, and then a little bit of tech work to get the guitar in and out, and then it's completely freeform and free-flowing.
I think that's what makes it feel so powerful as well. Agency is the beauty of video games, really. And it's quite interesting because the Artful Escape has minimal agency. You can run right to left, you can jump, there's a couple of buttons, that you can do a few different things. But that's really about even the conversation. Like there's a little bit of branching dialogue, but you can choose who you are and things. But even with the minimal sort of verb set, as you would call it within game design, the game feels like it has this incredible amount of agency, which is also the story of Francis, right? It's like giving him agency over his life and wrestling it from these great expectations. And I felt the game was
I wanted the sorry.
Go for it, go please.
You go. I wanted the guitar to feel powerful. It's like when you play Smells Like Teen Spirit, you don't think about what chords you're playing. You know what I mean? It's not like Guitar Hero. You're like, oh God, what's next in this 4-chord song? And it feels like extremely powerful. It feels like, standing on the nose of a ramjet. You know what I mean? It just feels so powerful. And I think one of the games that influences this game is actually the Arkham games, because when you fight as Batman, you really feel like Batman. Like you absolutely just busting skulls, because it shouldn't be tricky because you're Batman. You're playing henchmen. You know what I mean? You should just be wiping them out. And I wanted to feel like the guitar to feel that similar level of power.
It does, Johnny. It does. I felt it like playing the game and the just jumping around and the fluidity of it and the constant. There's something about the momentum of the game, like always moving in a particular direction, and it feels quite unbroken, like the transitions when you're landing and things, and just the very limited move set. It felt like, and that stuff that you're talking about, like me being able to just I picked up on myself doing it sort of subconsciously, and then which was coming in on a beat or coming into crescendo with something in the background, or the music building to a particular point, or me coming up to a rise in the level, or starting to sort of predict when a big vista was going to be revealed or something like that. And then I picked up on myself doing it subconsciously, and then through the game later on, I just was actually doing it on purpose, and it felt like I was interacting with this environment all through this guitar and all through this persona of mine. And there were moments where I just stopped. And like the part where you've got the disco worms, with the cities on their back. And I actually didn't know that I was meant to progress and continue on. So I just stood on that pad, and I read for like 5 minutes, just shredded. A full game, game moment where, like a core game memory was formed like there. And I was I was only holding one button, I was just shredding, but it was if the age, and that's one of the beauties of like this illusion that, if video game making is for all illusionists, or it's just one big magic trick, right? Like that was the greatest trick that ever pulled there for me, which was standing on that platform while the disco worms are going past in the background and just holding one button and feeling like I was I called myself the Messy Tiffin. So it's like the Messy Tiffin, who was the first soloist in the intergalactic convention or whatever. Like it felt that way. Yeah. It was just the soloing mechanic,
Yeah, I think it's interesting, isn't it? It's like you have so many kind of clubs in your bag as a developer. You have your gameplay, your music, your cinematics, your narrative. And sometimes I think, that promised land for me in gaming is where you can get them all to crescendo, that narrative and the gameplay and the score and everything. And then those are the moments that you remember when you can hit them all at once. Yeah. I think another thing that adds to kind of that feel is something that we do that for some reason, I don't know why a lot of side scrollers don't do it, but the cinematic movement of the camera is something that I think really adds to that kind of grandness and cinematicness of the Artful Escape, and being able to use I guess, it's one of the only kind of forms where you, as the director, have control of the camera and not the player. And you can obviously use like different cinematic techniques of bringing in when something personal is happening and zooming right out when you want to show the grandness of the landscape. And just little things like at the start of the Artful Escape, there's a lot of film theory about left to right versus right to left, and how that makes people feel. Right to left, people will often often think of that as being wrong or heading in the wrong direction or something off about moving right to left in screen. So when the story starts, Francis automatically begins walking right to left because he's walking in the wrong direction. And
It's
then
funny
as
that-
he
it's
kind
funny
of
that
gets
you
this
say
inspiration.
because my partner Tiffany was sitting next to me when we were playing, and so we're on the couch, and I'd actually shown her the Artful Escape before and everything, and I was like, "Oh, I'm actually going to play this game because we've got the podcast coming up," and so I just handed her the controls at the start because I knew she doesn't play video games, and or at least she hasn't since she was a kid, you know. And so I handed the controller to her, and she was walking left for about 40 seconds, and she said, "This feels wrong. Is this? Am I meant to be going this way?" And I was like, "Yeah, that's on purpose. That's absolutely on purpose. It's because you're stuck in your hometown. It's like, you know, you're heading in the wrong direction. Like it's all." And she was like, "Oh, okay. It really feels wrong." So she had this visceral, even as someone who doesn't play video games, she had this physical, like visceral reaction to heading in the wrong direction.
Yeah. Oh, that's great to hear. Yeah. I'm glad. It's always dope when people. It always feels good when people get it. You know.
Finally feel understood, Johnny.
Yeah.
No, but the camera and was something that I definitely felt was really well utilized in the game, and you know, to a degree where the bracketing of like how much you use the camera and how extremely you were zoomed out to punched in different moments, and even just cut in to like right up close on Francis's face or someone else, or even just his glasses. It really, really had an impact. I remember there was a moment where I was like, holy shit, I'm probably only like 10 pixels on this screen at the moment. And so many game developers would shy away from that. You know, conventionally, that's the character doesn't read well or whatever, but it just doesn't matter. And by that time in the game, I think I was 3 hours in, I knew exactly, like I could have played the game sort of with my eyes closed in regards to like just knowing I'm going to head in a direction, you jump every now and then. And it really took a backseat to allow the environment to really shine and come through and hit those emotional beats.
Yeah, I feel like the game knows what it is, which is, you know, it's very simple in some ways. It's very simple mechanically, obviously, but once you have that kind of kind of chapter of the game down, like once you have that feeling, you can start to pull the camera back. And like you said, like there's lots of rules that traditional rules that the Artful Escape breaks, but that's okay because you already know what it is by that time. By the time you break the rules, it's like, you know, you're not going to die. It's not going to punish you. So, don't know where I'm going with that. I was just going to end it.
That's all right. I'll change the subject. That's okay. Interestingly, with the Artful Escape as well, like I said, there's a minimal verb set, right? Like mechanically, it's very lean, it's very restrained. It really works for it. But I'm interested to know, was there anything that didn't make it in that you're like, oh, we had this, you know, this sequence, or we had this particular mechanic that I wanted to get in, or did it actually just end up being the thing that you wanted it to be, like wholly mechanically?
The thing we did have like hoverboarding where you hoverboarded, and that was cool, but we just didn't have time to get it right. And it's funny because I think, you know, I'm sure a lot of video game developers go through this, but you think you want all this stuff, and then when you can't have it and you make a smaller version, you realize that was what it should have been the whole time. Like you were aiming way too fat to begin with, and it's better. Like the Artful Escape is great. It shouldn't be any longer. The Artful Escape, you know, it's like I feel like it's pacing. You know, one of the things I like about Artful is I think its pacing is really good, and it ends where it should. So I'm glad that there wasn't any more that we put in.
I wanted to talk. I've actually got a note here to talk about the pacing because I agree. It's fantastic, and it's fantastic in the sense that a lot of, again, and I know I'm making a lot of comparisons here to like generally in video games, but I think there are so many conventions as game developers that we just lean straight into, or we think have to happen. Because of, you know, decades of player testing or whatever, that, you know, and so one of them is like the tutorial, learn everything up front, teach everyone everything as fast as possible, and then you're just doing those things for the rest of the game, right? But Artful Escape brilliantly, like almost, it feels like an almost even spread. spreads out these different elements or things that are happening throughout the game. And it's so welcome, I think, as well, because it is a game with such a restrained verb set. Like it's such a restrained amount of agency, or it's not like all these mechanical. It's not like World of Warcraft. Like, you hit level 10, now you got your mount and you can join a guild, or whatever. It's really quite.
We ain't got the money for that, Trent. We ain't got the cash.
Maybe hit up Nathan. The next game, Beethoven and Dinosaur. But there was the timing of the different elements, and I want to ask you a couple of questions, because one thing that was quite surprising to me, and it works really well, so I don't think it's a bad decision at all, it's just interesting where you could have put it in the game, is choosing your character, like in regards to the customization. By the time it happens, when you customize your character, it happens like 2/3 or 3/4 of the way through the game.
Yeah.
And you've already gone on this big journey and everything. You're deep into it. The player is already like, they've chosen their name and a bunch of other things. And then you have this moment, and it was at that moment that, like, when I created my character and chose all my customization, that I felt fully embodied in this character. Like, that the role playing was complete for me. And it felt, I don't know if you feel the same way, but it felt like it was the sort of, well, obviously you do, you put it there, but it felt like it was the perfect place to put that there. But it seems every other game you customize your character at the start, and you did it at the end. Tell me about
it. It would have been wrong, in our game to characterize and customize the character before you had gone on this journey, which is about kind of creating your stage persona. I mean, one of the main themes about the Artful Escape is the satellite aspects that surround people's core mediums. Not necessarily like David Bowie's music, but the way he dressed, the rumors that he spread about himself, or the film clips that he made, or the way he presented himself on stage. That's the kind of stuff I love about rock and roll. That kind of the satellite aspects, the world you build around that stuff to kind of elevate it. David Bowie's music is great, but it's better when it's from Ziggy.
Yes.
So I think, and that kind of happens throughout the game. Francis learns about like publicity stunts, and learns about the rumors that he spreads about himself, and the name that he gives himself, his title, how he, there's, Violetta Sister Francis, an entrance, whether literal or metaphysical, can never be undone. And that's just talking about like what your first single is and how you present yourself to the world the first time, people will never forget. So having Francis create his stage outfit, 3/4 of the way through the game, feels like it's the right place to do it. Felt like unique and cool, and people knew who Francis was, and they'd already put their kind of brushstrokes on who the stage persona was going to be. So I like that it drops in later in the game.
Yeah, and it was kind of, I'm only just realizing now, funnily enough, hearing you say it, that the game really is, because I'm thinking about, the game is okay, except moving from being Francis Vendetti and, being in the shadows of your uncle and, breaking out and being yourself. But, as it is as much of like crafting this rock persona, this fantastical character throughout the game. And whether it be, I loved as well that I would, be clicking through the dialogue and someone asked me some random question. I'm like, I did the first solo on, and then it just references it for the rest of the game to like literally at the end, I'm saying it in my final show. It really is beautiful.
Yeah.
How you've gone about crafting this persona.
It's a fun little kind of foible of the medium is branching dialogue, because you can say 3 things the character's thinking at once, which is like no other medium can really do that. You can't do that in a film,
Yeah.
So I think it's a really interesting thing of the craft, is being like, well, I can tell the viewer, 3 different opposing kind of thoughts that character is having at the same time, and then they can select which ways forward. And it's more about like characterization than it is about narrative. I think that's really interesting.
Let's talk a little bit about the narrative and the writing process. I mean, is this game the novel that you wrote that you showed no one? Have you now shown your novel to the world, or did you have the game written from the start? Or
the novel I wrote was about a bunch of supernatural musicians that live in a labyrinth beneath Vienna. So maybe next time we'll do that one.
I'm into it.
Yeah, no, I think I wrote the game. I wrote all the dialogue, except for all the babies that Carl Weather says. He added them.
You can't stop that. Who's going to stop Carl Weathers from saying "baby" at the end of every sentence? So you have no right to do that.
It's so good.
It comes with the territory.
No way. he was like helped me heaps actually because. I was telling him who the influences were and stuff like that, and for Lightman for his character, and he's like, well, he wouldn't say kid, he'd say young blood, and then he'd say baby, and he'd just like change all the lines to like make them work how he thought they would work, which is a guy from a white guy from Melbourne, Australia, who had never been to America at that point. Is you need all the help you can get.
Yeah, absolutely.
Narrative-wise, I think I really started with that concept of trying to create the stage persona, of like really starting with that theme of creating a persona, and then the whole narrative of like Francis stepping out from the shadow of his uncle, which really took over the narrative and is a lot more emotionally powerful than just like a marketing exercise, which is essentially what like a lot of the game is. It's like a lesson in marketing music, and that was something Annapurna pushed for a lot as well. I think was to like really lean into that emotional drive with Francis and his uncle, and I think that's kind of what makes the narrative great, is those kind of emotional connections and the conflict between Francis getting what he wants and what the town getting what they want. I think generally with video games you have more time in the first act than people generally use. Yeah. I think, like you were saying before, people try and dump you in very quickly, give you everything, and that's why I think a lot of games are lacking in a narrative sense, because they don't do the first act. They don't set up the initial world and the hopes and the dreams of the character. And the Artful Escape has quite a long first act. I think it's about an hour before you get into the Cosmic Extraordinary. And you go through this town and everyone tells you what their expectations are for your performance. And I think that's why the narrative in the game works well, because it has a more traditional kind of literature or cinematic first act.
It feels really purposeful, that first act, for sure. Like you can feel that you are holding us there, and it's for a reason. But it also has these beautiful threads of mystery and wonder and magic, and it's like the first time you meet Jason Schwartzman's character is Zom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Zom,
It's just this brilliant moment, and you're like, all right, okay, buckle up. I guess I'm not going to. It's a real tonal shift out the window for this game. Yeah, it's really, really.
Yeah. Jason Schwartzman was amazing, because I love Jason Schwartzman. He's one of my favorite actors, and the fact that he came and did the game was like astonishing. And I got to like hang out with him for an hour, just one day, like. But to talk about the character and everything, and we just spoke about Bob Dylan and David Bowie and spoke about Wes Anderson, and which I was like, that was a real moment.
Just
it was so great.
Your eye,
and then when he comes, oh, absolutely, I loved it. What's Wes like, really? Tell me. And then when he came into the booth to do. His lines for Zom, he brought in like all these props. He brought in like an umbrella and a scarf and a cape and a little synthesizer and stuff. And I'd be like, all right, let's try this line. And he'd do it. And then I'd be like, all right, let's just try the accent on this word. And then he'd like fling the scarf back and hold up the umbrella and like do the line again. And it was like magical. It was so crazy.
It's the true Zom appears. So good. So
I'm
keen to hear about, because the voice acting is is so great. Like, tell me about the process there in regards, because I know obviously it's a big draw card for, folks wanting to work with Annapurna. They've done it, I saw it, on 12 Minutes, had a fantastic cast, a number of their games. It's one of the big pools that they have, obviously straddling both films and games as an organization. Let our listeners in on some of that process and how it goes down.
The way that it happened with us was we did a playthrough for Annapurna, and there was a bug with the music that we didn't know about in the build. So there's like 15 people on the call. I'm playing through the whole game for Annapurna, and most of the music's broken. And if you've played the game, it's mostly music.
The game's not about music. That's fine. Don't worry about that.
So I'm reading out all the lines. Exactly. So I'm reading out all the dialogue lines in character, just like trying to cover the fact there's no music in the game.
Yeah. Okay.
And then at the end, I'm just like, oh, are they going to tear me to shreds here? Not that Annapurna has ever torn me to shreds.
But no, it would be anyone's fear with anyone,
Yeah. And then they're like, I think the game needs to be voiced. I'm like, shit. I've made so much more work for myself.
I love your terrible voice acting actually just distracted them from the bug, and then ended up with this fantastic, wonderful cast of actors.
Absolutely. It's silver lining on absolutely. So then they start asking me about, who do you want for Lightman? I'm like, well, who am I allowed to have? What's the level that we're talking about? And they're like, if you could have anyone, who would you get? And I'm like, I would get Carl Weathers. And then, a couple of days later, Carl's in, and then you're in the studio with him.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful.
That's how it went.
Did the VO come through like pretty early? Like, did you have tracks laid down early? Was it something that came through quite late in the process?
Really late. The game was there for them to see, which was great actually, because in the studio I could be like, usually I think people doing VO, it's very early in the piece, and there's no animation done or anything, but we don't lip sync, so the whole game was like, I could show them the scenes and show them the music and show them what the character looked like and stuff, and that seemed to help the actors out a lot. And so my first ever acting voice direction was with Carl Weathers, so I was like absolutely terrified. And Annapurna had put in a director with me called Ashley, who was going to teach me the ropes of like how to direct, and she was fantastic. And kind of we had a meeting beforehand to tell me the do's and don'ts, but then I found it was very similar to directing singers when you're in a recording studio, which is because singers are these weird fragile unicorns, and you have to like, and I've been that singer, and you have to like tell them, really keep the vibe up, and it's going great, and be very careful with the kind of feedback you give them. Singers are definitely way more emotional than actors, though. I've found in my experience.
They're singing, right? They're like they're talking, but emotionally.
That's my new definition of singing.
Yeah, it's just emotional talking. I love it.
So I was just like, got into the vibe pretty quick, and I really enjoyed directing actors, and every single actor I worked with was so professional and lovely. Like Lena Headey coming in, and she did like 10 different accents. She was like, which one of these do you want? I was like, Royal British, please. And they were just like, and I say metal a lot. And so I was like, working with Lena Headey, I'm like, metal. And she's like, starts copying me. She's like, fucking metal, mate. It's metal. And I was just like, this is such a cool place to be. And so I enjoyed doing, even though it was very nerve-wracking, I enjoyed directing actors, and I had read these lines for years, in my head, so I felt like I knew what I wanted, and everyone was wonderful.
And Lena Headey, this was post Game of Thrones, right? Like, this is just wrapped up recently, so yes.
Everyone had just been disappointed by Game of Thrones.
It's man, it's
And Mark Strong as well, who was amazing. Like he was like, do you want me to put this like a Shakespearean wobble in my voice? I'm like, fuck yeah, Mark Strong.
Yeah.
That sounds amazing.
Say Shakespearean wobble again. Whisper it into the mic.
It was funny too because we were like, I had the line open to the studio when he got there, and the dude who was the engineer. Because one of the funny things with these things is all the names are fake and the names of the projects are faked on the call sheet.
Of course. Yeah.
So to the paparazzi weren't running around to get Artful Escape, but I guess that's just like the process. So he didn't know Mark Strong was coming in. I could hear him on the other side go, "Oh, fuck me, it's fucking Mark Strong."
Having a moment for his British compatriot.
Yeah, totally. He was stoked.
All right. So now a bit of a pivot. Let's talk about just the game dev process in like from a meta view in regards to like big chunks and sort of how you went about it. Because, these 2D games, they're approaching so many different ways because these games are quite accessible to folks for their first games or for folks from different particular industries, right? Like you said, someone like yourself with an animation degree and a story can grab Unreal and start throwing this thing together. So how did you block the entire thing out and you could play it from start to finish pretty early, but it was, there was no art? Or because you came from an art background, was it like you went through meticulously, you didn't have the game finished until like 3 months out but everything was arted from the start? Talk me through the sort of the high level process, how you and your team worked and blocked this game out.
Let me tell you how not to do it.
Which also happens to be the way that you did it. Is that what you?
Exactly. So, yes, I was very art based, and at the beginning I was trying to like build all the art and the block out at the same time because I felt like this bit of art will influence the next bit of the section. Mm-hmm. Don't do that. That's a really bad idea. And so that was like one of the things that was tough was like just getting, I'd built this. The thing was I built this demo and it had won like best at E3 and stuff. And I was like, yeah, I know what I'm doing. And I just kind of took that like 3-month little apprenticeship and thought that I could put that out into a huge game. And that was a terrible idea. I think, we should have done a lot more blocking. We should have done a lot more just prototyping with different different mechanics and stuff like that. But in the end, like the Artful Escape is very pure. It's very minimal. It's exactly what it needs to be. I mean, there's this thing that people say about cinema, which is that cinema is the only medium where the creator wants you to feel a specific way at a specific time. Mm-hmm. And I feel like that can be put across to narrative games as well. And that's what makes the Artful Escape great is just those moments of connecting character and music and gameplay and hitting those crescendos. So I think it got where it needed to be, but it was definitely like the long way round of like finding how to get those dynamics and finding how to create levels where those things could hit at the same time. I think Artful Escape in its pacing is very musical. It's very like verse, chorus, bring it back down, have a drawn out verse, go to the middle 8, do a guitar solo, chorus. That's the way it kind of it's laid out. So I think, having people who are musicians work on pacing and people who are illustrators work on art, people who are, from film backgrounds work on framing and stuff like that. If you bring in all these different creatives, you can, luckily for us, it seemed to work out and make something that was kind of unique.
Was there anything that sort of came through later in the process that was kind of, intuitive once you were picking up and playing with it? You're like, oh, something's missing here. It needs this other element, or something that just, took a lot of time or came in at the end and sort of tied the
I think that would be the VO.
Yeah.
The VO coming was what came in at the end and took up most of my time. And just like the editing of I can't believe like how long that took, like how much effort was to like edit and place dialogue in a game, especially in one that's like pushed through button by button. Epic. But I think what was interesting was finding the right mix for the jam battles, the kind of Simon Says jam battles, because that can be really effective, but it kind of, its welcome is worn out quite quickly. Like you need to be powerful and visceral with those kind of call and response jams and then get out and onto something else. So I think it was like, how many segments are these things going to be? We had them quite long. And I think in the end, just because we had played them 10,000 times, like we've got to make these shorter. So I think, it was like the things that came through kind of near the tail end were just about pacing, was bringing things out, I guess there's a lot of art, literature and cinema and everything where when you get to the end, you realize it's a little bit fat and you got to trim it off.
Cut it down a little bit.
So that was the things that kind of changed in the tail of the game.
Beautiful. So you've now made this game. You've obviously had a bunch of acknowledgements and accolades. It's been played by a bunch of folks. I mean, you're on Game Pass and stuff as well, right? So it's like, it's in the hands of a bunch of people. It's a astounding achievement for a team of misfits from Melbourne who never made a game before.
That's
right?
Great.
Like it's fantastic, but now you've got the sophomore problem, right? So what's your thoughts for the sophomore album? Are you working? Obviously, you're not going to tell us what it is today, but like, what's next for Beethoven and Dinosaur? Sorry.
I mean, I think I have the same problems for the sophomore album that any band does, which is you have your whole life to make that first album, and then everyone's like, that's the next one, And the thing is, too, is like you have responsibility for all the people who work for you as well, so you have to get straight back into it. We used, I think, the little profit that we had just to give everyone 3 months off in between games. Otherwise, we were just going to smash into the next one. So that was nice. But we're actually handing in our demo for our new game to Annapurna today.
Wow,
so,
that is very exciting.
Yeah, so after this, I'm running back into the studio to put on the final touches. I think, I'll just say that it's
exciting.
We're taking what we learned from Artful Escape and what was great about it and making it bigger.
That sounds like an absolutely phenomenal plan. I like it. Signed. I'll take it. I'll take you out to a dinner. I don't know if I can rival Nathan's, but done. Dinner. There you go. Deal. Johnny, awesome. It's been
Betty's Burgers.
Betty's. I've never been to Betty's Burgers. I don't know, and I don't.
Oh,
know
it's fine.
It's okay. That was my thought. I thought, but is this thing, an epiphany, or is it just no? Okay, good. Well, that's fine. So, hey, thanks, man. Thanks for hanging out. It's been wonderful chatting with you.
Oh, it's super fun just to talk shop. I really enjoy it. Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome, my dude. And best of luck with your demo. Give my love to all the team and the crew at Annapurna.
Stay metal as fuck, Trent.
Always. You know me. Have a good day, man. Best of luck.